My husband sold my food truck 12 days before his daughter's wedding and told me, "Don't be dramatic, Clara. It was just an old truck, and Brittany deserves one perfect day." He said it in our kitchen with a glass of bourbon in his hand, like he had made a practical family decision instead of stealing the business I built after my first divorce. Brittany sat at the island, scrolling through her wedding photo shoot ideas, not even pretending to be sorry. She looked up once and said, "Honestly, it was embarrassing having that thing parked outside. People thought we were poor." I did not scream. I did not throw his glass. I simply looked at Mark and asked, "Who signed the title?" That was the first time the room went quiet. Mark blinked. Brittany's thumb stopped moving on her phone. The food truck was called Bluebird Kitchen, painted navy blue with a little white bird on the side, and I had built it from nothing but a used griddle, a county permit, and the kind of exhaustion you only survive when failure is not an option. That truck paid my rent when I was alone. It paid Mark's overdue mortgage twice after we married. It paid for Brittany's bridal shower deposit, her dress alterations, and the small emergency photographer payment she promised to reimburse, and never did. So when Mark called it just an old truck, he was not insulting metal. He was insulting every morning I woke up at 4:30 to keep all of us afloat. Before I continue, if you have ever watched someone spend your sacrifice and then call you selfish for asking questions, you will understand why I stayed calm. I had been married to Mark Reynolds for 6 years, and in those 6 years, I had become useful. Useful when his real estate commissions dried up. Useful when his ex-wife refused to help with Brittany's wedding. Useful when his mother wanted free catering because family helps family. But the moment I told Mark I would not drain my business account for Brittany's luxury lighting package, I became bitter, jealous, and unsupportive. Brittany's wedding was being held at Waverly Hall, a restored estate outside Franklin, Tennessee, with white columns, old oak trees, and a bridal suite designed for women who wanted to cry beautifully near expensive curtains. The package was already $68,400 before flowers, alcohol, band, and the late-night breakfast bar Brittany wanted because tacos were too basic. By late-night breakfast bar, she meant my recipes, my biscuits, my smoked brisket hash, and my lemon ricotta pancakes served by people in black gloves so nobody had to see the woman who created them. She wanted Bluebird Kitchen's food without Bluebird Kitchen in the parking lot because, as she put it, the truck ruins the aesthetic. I had agreed to cater the breakfast bar at cost, not because Brittany deserved it, but because I still believed peace was cheaper than conflict. I was wrong. Peace with entitled people is never cheap. It comes with another invoice every time. 3 weeks before the wedding, Brittany changed the menu twice, demanded monogrammed biscuit wrappers, and told me I needed to make the food look less truckish. I told her the truck was part of the licensed mobile kitchen attached to the permit, and if she did not want the truck visible, she could hire a full-service caterer at full price. She smiled and said, "Dad said you'd figure it out." Now the truck was gone. Mark set his bourbon down and tried to sound patient. The buyer paid $22,500 cash. That covered the string quartet, Brittany's dress balance, and part of the lighting. "You can buy another truck later." Brittany rolled her eyes. "It's not like it was a real restaurant." I turned toward her slowly. "That truck has a business license, a health permit, insurance, supplier contracts, and more repeat customers than your father has closed listings this year." Mark's face hardened. "Watch it." I looked back at him. "Who signed the title?" He pulled a folded paper from his back pocket and slapped it on the counter. There. You want documents? There are documents. I picked it up carefully. The buyer was a catering equipment reseller in Murfreesboro. The sale amount was $22,500. The VIN matched Bluebird Kitchen. And at the bottom, under seller authorization, was my name, written in a shaky imitation of my signature. For a moment, I felt nothing but clarity. My real signature has a long loop through the C in Clara and a clean break before Whitmore. This one looked like someone had copied it from a birthday card while panicking. I looked at Mark. "You signed my name." He looked away. Brittany whispered, "Dad." He snapped, "It was for the family." That was the sentence that ended my marriage. Not the sale, not the insult. That sentence. Because in Mark's mouth, family meant everyone got to use me, and I got to call it love. I folded the bill of sale and slid it into my purse. Mark reached for it, but I stepped back. "No," I said. "This belongs with me now." Brittany's voice sharpened. "If you call the police, I'll tell everyone you tried to destroy my wedding because you couldn't stand not being the center of attention." I almost smiled. Public shame used to work on me. I used to swallow insults to keep peace at birthdays, showers, holidays, and family dinners where I brought food and left with dirty pans. But seeing my forged name under the sale of the truck that rebuilt my life cured me of that habit. Then my phone buzzed. It was an email from Waverly Hall's event coordinator. "Final vendor verification required, Bluebird Kitchen." I opened the attachment while Mark and Brittany watched me. The packet listed my business license number, my insurance policy, my health permit, and a new vendor authorization form I had never signed. At the bottom was another fake version of my signature. But that was not the part that made the room tilt. The final page said all catering services at Waverly Hall had to be approved by Waverly Hospitality Group, the exclusive food service rights holder for the venue. I looked at Mark, then at Brittany. They had no idea Waverly Hospitality Group was mine. I did not tell Mark and Brittany what Waverly Hospitality Group meant. Not then. People reveal more when they think you are still confused. I closed the attachment, put my phone face down on the counter, and said, "I need the buyer's contact information." Mark frowned. "Why?" I looked at the forged bill of sale in my purse. "Because either you sold my truck illegally or someone helped you sell it illegally. I would like to know which one before I decide how ugly this gets." Brittany laughed under her breath. "There she goes, threatening everyone with paperwork." I turned to her. "Paperwork is what separates a wedding from a fraud file." Mark stepped between us like he still had authority in a room where he had already admitted theft. "Clara, listen to me. I made a decision for this family. The truck was sitting there, and Brittany needed the money now. Sterile the wedding, I was going to help you replace it." That almost made me laugh. Mark's version of help always arrived after he had spent whatever I needed to survive. "With what money?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "Don't embarrass me." There it was again. Not "I'm sorry." Not "I panicked." Just "don't embarrass me." As if exposure were worse than the thing being exposed. I walked into my office and shut the door before either of them could follow. Bluebird Kitchen's files were in one cabinet titled Copy LLC Registration, Health Department Permit, Insurance Certificate, Supplier Agreements, and the catering contract Brittany had begged me to sign at cost. I pulled everything. The truck title was not in Mark's name. The LLC was not in Mark's name. The insurance was not in Mark's name. The permit was not in Mark's name. He had not sold a family vehicle. He had sold company property owned by Bluebird Kitchen LLC, and he had done it with a forged signature. The first call I made was to the reseller in Murfreesboro. A man named Glenn answered, cheerful at first, then careful when I identified myself as the actual owner. He said Mark had arrived with the truck, a bill of sale, a copy of my driver's license, and a story about his wife being too busy with wedding prep to come in person. My stomach tightened at the driver's license part. Did he give you the original title? I asked. Glenn hesitated. He gave us a signed title copy and said the original was being overnighted. That was sloppy. Sloppy was good. Sloppy meant the truck had probably not been fully transferred yet. Do not move, modify, strip, resell, repaint, or part out that truck, I said. My attorney will contact you within the hour. Glenn's voice changed completely. Ma'am, are you saying this was unauthorized? I said. I am saying preserve the truck exactly as you received it. The second call was to my attorney, Lila Grant. Lila had helped me form Bluebird Kitchen LLC after my first divorce, back when all I owned was a used truck and the refusal to be dependent again. She listened without interrupting as I explained the sale, the forged title signature, the vendor authorization, and the Waverly Hall packet. When I finished, she said, Do not confront him further tonight. Send me copies. I'll issue a preservation notice to the reseller and a fraud notice to the venue. Then she paused. Clara, did Mark have access to your license scan? I looked toward the hallway, where I could hear Brittany complaining that I was spiraling. He had access to our home printer, I said, and my office drawer. Lila's voice cooled. Then we may have identity misuse too. By dinner time, the family narrative had already begun. Brittany posted a story with a close-up of white roses and the caption, "Trying to stay joyful while someone makes my wedding about herself." Mark's sister texted me, "You know this day isn't about you, right?" His mother left a voicemail saying, "A truck can be replaced, but ruining a young woman's wedding is forever." I saved all of it. They thought they were pressuring me. They were actually time-stamping motive. At 8:42 p.m., Mark came to my office door and knocked once before opening it, which was his version of respect. "Brittany is crying," he said. I looked up from my scanner. About the forged signature or the lighting package? His face darkened. "You're enjoying this." "No," I said. "I enjoyed my business. You sold it." He leaned on the doorframe, suddenly softer. "Clara, please. We are less than 2 weeks out. Let the wedding happen, and afterward we'll fix everything." That was the most dangerous offer entitled people make. Let us benefit first, and we will discuss your loss later. I asked him one more time. "Did you sign my name on the vendor authorization for Waverly Hall?" He looked away. That was enough. Then he said, "The venue just needed updated paperwork." Brittany was panicking. "I knew you would say no because you always need control." I set the scanner lid down slowly. I would have said no because the truck was part of the licensed setup, and because my business insurance does not exist so your daughter can cosplay rich. Mark slammed his palm against the door frame. "She is my daughter." I stood. "And Bluebird Kitchen is mine." The next morning, Lila sent formal notices to the reseller, Waverly Hall, and Mark by email. The reseller responded first, confirming the truck was still on site and would not be touched pending ownership verification. Waverly Hall responded 20 minutes later, much more carefully. Their event coordinator wrote that the vendor packet had been submitted by Brittany Reynolds and Mark Reynolds, and that all late-night breakfast service was pending final approval from Waverly Hospitality Group. Brittany burst into the house just after noon, waving her phone. "What did you do?" she shouted. "The venue says my breakfast bar is under review." Mark followed behind her, angry. "You contacted them," I said. "My attorney did." Brittany's voice cracked into fury. "It's biscuits, Clara. You are threatening my wedding over biscuits?" I looked at her and said, "No. I am protecting my company from people who forged my name twice." She pointed at me with a manicured finger. "You're jealous because no one ever threw you a wedding like this." Mark said, "Brittany, stop." But she was too far gone. "No, Dad. She needs to hear it. She acts like her little truck makes her important, but it's trashy. It's always been trashy. I don't want it at my wedding. I don't want her food. And I don't want people thinking my family is some roadside biscuit stand." I let her finish. Then I picked up my phone and pressed play on the voice memo I had started the second she walked in. Her face went white. "John," Mark whispered. "Clara saw." I stopped the recording and saved it, because the rehearsal dinner was tomorrow night, and Brittany had just given me the perfect preview of what she would say in public. The rehearsal dinner was held in Waverly Hall's garden room, a glass-walled space overlooking the estate lawn, where string lights hung from old oak branches and every table had been dressed in cream linen, gold flatware, and flowers Brittany had definitely not paid for herself. I arrived 20 minutes late on purpose, not because I wanted drama, but because I wanted the room settled before I walked in. People reveal their real opinions when they think the person they are insulting has chosen not to show up. Mark saw me first. His face tightened, then softened into that public husband expression he wore whenever witnesses were present. "Clara," he said, crossing the room too quickly, "I'm glad you came." He kissed the air near my cheek like we were normal. I let him, not because I forgave him, but because the garden room had cameras, vendors, guests, and a venue manager named Elaine who already knew my attorney had flagged the catering packet. Every move mattered now. I was not there to argue. I was there to let them keep performing. Brittany stood near the head table in a white satin dress, laughing with her bridesmaids. When she saw me, her smile thinned. She leaned toward one of them and said something that made the girl cover her mouth. I heard enough. She actually came. I took my seat at the table Mark had placed near the back, not with immediate family, not with the wedding party, but beside a photographer's assistant and a cousin nobody recognized. That used to hurt me. That night, it helped. From the back of the room, I could see everything. Elaine Porter. Waverly Hall's event director approached quietly and placed a hand on the empty chair beside me. She was in her 50s, polished, careful, and far too experienced to show surprise in public. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said softly, "your attorney spoke with our office. We have preserved all submitted vendor documents. Nothing tied to Bluebird Kitchen will proceed without written confirmation from the authorized rights holder." I nodded. "Thank you, Elaine." She hesitated for half a second. "I assume you will be available after the toast?" I said, "I will." The toast came after the salad course. Mark stood first, holding champagne, looking every inch the generous father. He talked about Brittany's childhood, her big dreams, her perfect taste, her deserving heart. Then he said, "And sometimes, as parents, we do whatever it takes to give our children the day they deserve." Several people clapped. Brittany dabbed her eyes. I watched Mark's hand shake just slightly around the glass. He knew that sentence had a second meaning. I wondered whether he understood that theft sounds noble only when the victim stays quiet. Then Brittany took the microphone. She thanked her bridesmaids, her planner, her father, and everyone who helped make this wedding elegant. Then she laughed and said, "Some of you know I had one tiny fear, which was that my wedding would end with a greasy blue food truck parked by the fountain." The room chuckled politely. Mark looked down. Brittany kept going, because spoiled people cannot resist applause once they smell it. But my dad handled it. He made sure we upgraded everything, because this is Waverly Hall, not a roadside biscuit stand. More laughter. Not from everyone, but enough. She lifted her glass. "So here's to family who understands standards." I did not move. I did not interrupt. I simply looked at Elaine, who stood near the service entrance with her tablet in hand. Elaine's expression did not change, but she tapped the screen once. A moment later, 2 catering staff members stopped setting up the late-night breakfast display in the adjoining room. A rolling rack of biscuit warmers was turned around. A bartender whispered to a manager. The first domino fell without a sound. Brittany noticed the movement before anyone else. Her smile faltered. "Is there a problem?" she asked, still holding the microphone. Elaine stepped forward. "We need to pause all late-night breakfast service pending vendor authorization review." Brittany blinked. "What? No, that's already paid for." Elaine's voice remained professional. "The service cannot proceed under the submitted documents." Mark stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. "Elaine, this is not the time." She turned to him. "Mr. Reynolds, this became the time when Waverly Hall received disputed documents involving Bluebird Kitchen's license and insurance." Guests began whispering. Brittany looked at me with pure hatred. "You did this." I stood slowly. "No, Brittany, you did. I just stopped letting my business be used as decoration." Mark crossed toward me, lowering his voice. "Clara, sit down." I looked at him. "You sold my truck with a forged signature. You submitted my business license without permission. And you let your daughter mock the company she expected to feed her guests for free." Brittany shouted. "It wasn't free! Dad paid for it!" I opened my purse and removed the copy of the bill of sale. "With money from property he did not own." Elaine gestured toward a side office. "Mrs. Nether Whitmore, Mr. Nether Reynolds, Brittany. We need to discuss this privately." Brittany laughed bitterly into the microphone before realizing it was still on. Of course she wants a private room. She can't stand that this isn't about her. I looked at the microphone, then at her. "Leave it on if you want. I have nothing to hide." That shut the room down. In the office, Mark finally tried to switch from anger to pleading. "Clara, please. The wedding is tomorrow. We can fix the truck after." I placed 3 documents on Elaine's desk: the forged bill of sale, the fake vendor authorization, and Bluebird Kitchen's LLC ownership record. There is no after when my name is being forged before. Elaine reviewed the papers, then opened a file of her own. There is also the matter of Waverly Hospitality Group approval. Brittany threw her hands up. Why does everyone keep saying that like it matters? Elaine looked at me, waiting. I turned to Brittany and said, because Waverly Hospitality Group controls every food service approval at this venue. Mark's face went pale. Brittany rolled her eyes. So call them. Elaine folded her hands. I said, you already did. Brittany stared at me like I had spoken in another language. What do you mean we already did? She asked. Mark knew. I saw it in the way his shoulders dropped before his face caught up. He had heard the company name before, maybe on an email signature, maybe on a vendor packet, maybe on one of the documents he never bothered to read because he thought my business was too small to respect. Elaine opened the venue file and turned the laptop slightly so everyone could see the approval chain. At the top was the venue name, Waverly Hall. Beneath it was the food service clause. And under exclusive rights holder, in clean black letters, it said, Waverly Hospitality Group, Managing Member, Clara Whitmore. For once, Brittany had nothing ready. No insult, no eye roll, no fake tears. Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find a version of reality where the roadside biscuit stand had not just become the gatekeeper to her wedding menu. Mark rubbed his forehead. Clara, I didn't know. I looked at him. That has been the theme of our marriage. He flinched, but not from guilt. Mark hated being corrected more than he hated being wrong. Elaine remained professional. Mrs. Whitmore acquired Waverly Hospitality Group's regional catering rights last year. The agreement gives her company final approval over any outside food vendor, mobile kitchen, late-night service, or branded menu items served on the property. Brittany found her voice again, thinner now. But Bluebird Kitchen was already approved. I nodded. Bluebird Kitchen was approved when I approved it. Then you and Mark sold the licensed truck, forged my signature, submitted a fake vendor authorization, and tried to use my insurance after removing the actual insured equipment from the event. Elaine added. That creates a liability problem for the venue, I said. And a fraud problem for the people who submitted the forms. Mark turned sharply toward me. You are not going to use that word at my daughter's wedding. I looked at him calmly. Then you should not have committed it for her wedding. Elaine closed the laptop. As of now, Waverly Hall cannot allow the late-night breakfast service to proceed under the submitted paperwork. We also need immediate replacement proof of catering coverage for any food tied to Bluebird Kitchen recipes, equipment, or branding. Brittany's face went red. My guests are expecting that breakfast bar, I said. Then you should have treated the person providing it like a person, not a prop. She pointed at me. You said you'd do it at cost. I said I would provide food through my licensed business. I did not say your father could sell my truck, copy my license, and forge my name. Mark softened his voice, which was always the sign that anger had failed and manipulation was reporting for duty. Clara, please. We can pay you back from the wedding gifts. I almost laughed. You sold a business asset for $22,500, used the money before the wedding, and now you want to repay me with envelopes from guests who think they are congratulating your daughter? He looked toward Elaine, embarrassed that I had said it plainly. I was under pressure, I said. So was I. Every morning I stood in that truck before sunrise. Somehow I managed not to steal from you. Elaine stepped out to speak with the venue's general manager, leaving the three of us in the office. The second the door closed, Brittany hissed, You are loving this. I looked at her satin dress, her perfect hair, the panic under all that polish. No, Brittany. I loved my truck. She scoffed, but her voice shook. It was ugly. It was mine. Mark said, "Enough. Both of you." I turned to him. "There is no both. You forged my signature. She used my business while mocking it. I am the only one in this room who has not lied." I do. That was when Brittany made her worst mistake. She grabbed her phone and started recording. "Say it again," she snapped. "Say you're canceling my wedding because you hate me." I looked straight into her camera. "I am not canceling your wedding. Waverly Hall is pausing food service attached to forged documents, unauthorized insurance use, and a business asset your father sold without legal authority." Her hand trembled. That was not the clip she wanted. Mark reached for her phone. "Turn that off." She pulled away. "No, people should see what she's doing," I said. "Please post it. My attorney will appreciate the timestamp." Elaine returned with the general manager and a man from venue security. "Here is what we can do," she said. "The wedding ceremony and reception space remain available because those payments cleared. However, the late-night breakfast bar is canceled unless Mrs. Whitmore gives written authorization and updated coverage. The venue will not use disputed licenses, recipes, insurance documents, or vendor forms." Brittany whispered, "But the whole point was the breakfast bar." That was not true. The point was the marriage, the family, the vows. But Brittany had spent so long confusing appearance with meaning that losing biscuits felt like losing love. Mark looked at me with desperation now. "Name your price." That was the closest he came to admitting what he had taken. I said, "This is not a negotiation." "Everything is a negotiation," he snapped. "Not ownership." Elaine looked down at her tablet. "There is also the issue of vendor replacement. If the family wants full-service catering to replace the canceled breakfast bar by tomorrow, our emergency vendor rate starts at $18,900, subject to availability." Brittany's eyes widened. "Dad." Mark went silent. The room understood before she did. The $22,500 from my truck was gone. The lighting package, quartet, and dress balance had eaten it. There was no emergency vendor fund, no backup, no rich father saving the day. Just a man who had sold his wife's business to make himself look generous for 24 more hours. My phone buzzed. Dot. It was Lila. "Reseller confirms truck is intact." Dot. "We have written hold." Dot. "Also, Mark sent them a scanned license from your office file." Dot. "Strong evidence." I slid the phone back into my purse and looked at Mark. Dot. "Bluebird Kitchen is being recovered." Dot. "You will not touch it again." Brittany's voice broke. "So you're just going to embarrass us tomorrow?" I picked up my folder. "No. You embarrassed yourselves tonight. Tomorrow, I am just going to let the venue follow the contract." As I left the office, I passed the garden room where guests were still whispering over half-finished desserts. Brittany's microphone sat abandoned on the head table. The breakfast display room was dark now, the warmers unplugged, the trays removed, the little monogrammed biscuit wrappers stacked uselessly beside a silver serving spoon. For 6 years, they had treated my work like something small enough to take. Emotionally, that night, they finally learned it was big enough to stop the room. The wedding still happened the next day, because I did not cancel it. That mattered to me. I did not want to punish guests who had flown in, vendors who had done honest work, or a groom who looked increasingly confused by the family he was marrying into. Waverly Hall opened its gates at 4 o'clock. The white chairs were lined beneath the oak trees. The flowers were arranged. The string quartet played exactly as the contract promised. And Brittany walked down the aisle in the dress my stolen truck had helped finish paying for. From a distance, everything looked perfect. That was the cruel little trick of expensive events. They could make a collapsing family look elegant for photographs. I did not sit in the front row. I sat near the back, wearing a navy dress and the calm face Mark had always mistaken for surrender. He glanced at me once during the ceremony, then quickly looked away. Brittany never looked at me at all. She smiled through her vows, but I could see the stiffness in her jaw every time she remembered there would be no late-night breakfast bar, no monogrammed biscuit wrappers, no guests praising her elevated Southern concept. For someone who had called my business trashy, she looked devastated to lose it. The first real consequence arrived during cocktail hour. Elaine quietly pulled Mark aside near the veranda. I watched from across the lawn as she handed him the updated balance sheet. Without the Bluebird kitchen service, Brittany's planner had begged the venue for an emergency replacement, past mini chicken biscuits, shrimp and grits cups, and late-night coffee service from an approved vendor. The rush fee, staffing, insurance adjustment, and vendor premium totaled $19,760 due before service. Mark stared at the paper like numbers had personally attacked him. Brittany rushed over, read it, and said, loud enough for 3 bridesmaids to hear, "Dad, just pay it." He could not. That was the part nobody had planned for. Mark had already spent the $22,500 from my truck. The venue did not accept promises, wedding gifts, or wounded father speeches as payment. When his card declined the first time, he blamed the machine. When it declined the second time, Brittany's face changed. Not with concern for him, with embarrassment. The groom, Tyler, stepped closer and asked, "What is going on?" Brittany snapped, "Nothing." But it was not nothing. It was the sound of fake generosity running out of stolen cash. Elaine remained professional. Without payment and without valid Bluebird authorization, we cannot provide the late-night service. Brittany turned toward me across the lawn. "Clara can fix this." Everyone looked. That was the moment they had been waiting for, though none of them would admit it. The old pattern. Clara would absorb the insult, cover the bill, save the room, and let everyone call it family later. Mark's mother even had the nerve to whisper, "Please, Clara, don't do this today." I walked over slowly and looked at Mark. "Do what?" He swallowed. "Help us," I said. "You mean pay for the service you tried to steal from me?" Brittany's eyes filled with furious tears. "It's my wedding." I nodded. "And Bluebird Kitchen is my business." Tyler looked from Brittany to Mark. "You sold her truck." Nobody answered. That silence did more damage than any speech I could have given. Elaine handed him a copy of the revised vendor note. Because grooms sign contracts too. And Tyler read just enough to understand the words forged authorization and disputed business asset. His face went pale. "Brittany, did you know?" Brittany said, "Dad handled it." Mark said, "I was trying to give you both a beautiful day." Tyler stepped back. with someone else's property? That sentence landed cleanly. It cut through the flowers, the champagne, the string music, and all the expensive pretending. Brittany looked at her new husband like he had betrayed her by noticing the truth. "You're taking her side," Tyler said. "I'm asking if my wedding was paid for with fraud," Mark snapped. "Don't use that word," I said quietly. "You keep objecting to the vocabulary instead of the behavior." By 7 o'clock, the emergency breakfast service was canceled. Dinner still went out because that vendor had been properly paid. The cake was cut. The band played. The guests danced. But the glamorous late-night reveal Brittany had bragged about for months never happened. Instead, people whispered. They whispered about the declined card. They whispered about the food truck. They whispered about the bride's father and the stepmother at the back table, who somehow controlled the catering rights to the estate. The reseller returned Bluebird Kitchen 3 days later, after Lila's notice and ownership proof made the sale impossible to complete. The truck came back dusty, but intact. Mark did not get the $22,500 back immediately because the reseller filed a dispute over fraudulent paperwork and recovery costs. That became his problem, not mine. Lila referred the forged signature, copied license, and unauthorized vendor forms to the proper channels. Waverly Hall permanently removed Mark and Brittany from any preferred client privileges. Waverly Hospitality Group updated its policy so no family member, spouse, or event host could submit vendor authorizations without direct owner verification. My marriage ended in paperwork, which felt appropriate. Mark begged once, then blamed me. Then begged again when he realized my business account, my LLC, and my catering rights were not marital decorations. I filed for divorce and requested preservation of financial records tied to the truck sale. He called me ruthless. I told him ruthless would have been letting him keep thinking he was a good man. Brittany sent one message 2 weeks later. "You ruined the happiest day of my life." I stared at it for a long time, then typed back, "No, Brittany. I refused to let you build it out of mine." Then I blocked her. The first morning Bluebird Kitchen reopened, I parked it outside the medical district before sunrise. The navy paint caught the early light. A nurse from the night shift tapped the window and said, "I missed you." For the first time in weeks, I smiled without calculating what it would cost me. I made biscuits, brewed coffee, and watched a line form down the sidewalk. Family is not a license to steal. Marriage is not ownership. And peace that requires you to disappear is not peace at all. Sometimes the best revenge is not destroying the wedding. Sometimes it is getting your keys back, reopening your window, and serving breakfast to people who actually know the value of what you built.